I am back with another episode of Obsessed with Assessment podcast. This time I'm joined by a very special guest. If there is such a thing as assessment royalty, then Dr Mick Walker surely belongs to the family. I could read you his full CV, but it would probably take up half of the episode. So hopefully it will suffice to say that if you can think of any educational assessment body in England over the last 20 years, then Mick has probably either worked for or with them in a senior role. To list but a few: the National Curriculum Council, QCA, Ofqual, the DFE, the NAHT, AQA, the Chartered Institute of Educational Assessors, and Evidence-Based Education. He's also worked as an advisor on assessment with the Welsh and the Pakistani governments. So welcome to the podcast, Mick.
Thank you very much indeed. I think what you've said in a nutshell there is I'm just old. I think that's what it is. If you hang around long enough, you tend to work in lots of different areas. But yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. It's very kind. I think it's probably worth saying before some of those august bodies fell for letting me work for them. I did teach for about 20 years in the secondary phase and sixth form. So I did have a bit of a grounding in the classroom before joining. Well, the first body I joined really was a local education authority as an advisory teacher, and then went on from there to the National Curriculum Council. So I have got roots in the classroom. That's before I started interfering with the national curriculum and exams and all that kind of thing.
So today we're going to be talking about designing national assessment systems that work for everybody, but most importantly for the classroom teacher. I'm going to aim to follow the usual format of the show, which is to have 10 minutes of insightful conversation. That's optimistic, I suspect.
Good luck with that.
Before offering some key takeaways for teachers at the end. This is probably a huge question, and there probably is one very obvious answer. Is it possible for one assessment to meet all assessment goals? So one assessment to fulfill sort of formative function, summative function, school accountability, national standards? How close could we get to that?
I mean, the quick answer is no, as you probably suspect. But it does intrigue me when people talk about this formative, summative thing. In fact, Paul Black has written about this in the past. About people talk about them as though they come two ends of a spectrum kind of thing. When they're not really. It's just the use to which a particular test is put to. So you can use a GCSE can be used for formative reasons. If you don't, as a lot of people do, look at the item analysis. What questions that kids do well on or not so well or what have you. But unfortunately, that might not inform that group of kids because they have now moved on. But it would inform the teacher in terms of their, the way that they may have taught something well or not so well. And it really is about the inferences that people take from it. Whether what they're saying, the inference they take, is that a valid reading of what that test is trying to do. And there's some work by Paul Newton. I think his first paper on this was about 2007, which is about the uses of assessment. And I think Paul came up with 22 different uses, and all legitimate in their own way. I think it was mentioned earlier, it can be for a qualification, it can be a license to practice, or it can be for a formative reason or something like that. So there's lots of different uses. But where it does go wrong, I think, is when one test is used for different purposes, like accountability. Gordon Stobart's written a lovely book about the uses and abuses of assessment. That's worth a look at as well. People abuse them by using them for the wrong reason. So judging one school in the northeast of the country with a school in the southwest based on the outcomes of a national curriculum assessment in reading or a GCSE in mathematics is in my view not the right thing. It tells you something, but what Paul Black was saying, that the data that came from the tests should be brought together and it should be made available to teachers. Because when I started moderating many years ago, it was the best CPD I've ever done, because it got me into other schools to see what they did. The marking got me to see how other schools and how other kids answered questions, etc. And it fed back to me about, how do my kids compare with that? Am I doing them justice? Am I getting them to that same level? And if not, why not? And if I am, great. If things are, I seem to be as successful, or my kids seem to be successful as others, it's kind of reassuring that you're on the right track. But if you're not, it raises questions like, so how come that school down the road does better? You then need to look at that school, because as we know, socioeconomic or demographic things that sit on the back of that. But if you find a school that is pretty similar to yours, then you might start to think, well, hang on, how do they do that? Because everything does look equal. But they were worried that the data would be abused. It would be, end up in tables. And that it was John Patton, 1992, performance tables were introduced for the first time. But that was for GCSEs. And that changed the nature of exams, in my view, that one thing. And he was interviewed on a programme, and I think he said something words to the effect that if anyone objected to that, they were Neanderthal, was the phrase that he used.
Wow.
And then in 1996, national curriculum assessments were added to the performance tables. And there's still, every year, the department used to make a statement about what would be in the accountability tables. Things like GMVQs came in and went out, or they might have a focus on particular areas. So they still had to, over the years, we've had this movement of performance tables, league tables, as they're known in the papers, and they're interesting. They tell us something, but to put schools in order and make a judgment that is right. And as we know, it's a zero-sum game. If I do better next year, it means another school drops down.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of abuses in the way that we use assessment, and then on the back of it, assessment gets a bad name. Teachers. I've spoken to many teachers out this, through the CIA and others chartered institute, and people see assessment as something that's done to them, something that's imposed, and really it shouldn't be. I mean, I want to know that when I get on a plane that my pilot has actually passed some of these exams, and that the surgeon has actually qualified in things.
I noticed that on the Chartered Institute of Educational Assessors website, it credits you with rebuilding the national curriculum assessment system. So is that true? And what does that look like? Is it possible to do it better?
We did make some changes behind the scenes to make things work better. I mean, one of the interesting things about the papers for national curriculum assessments, which I don't think people really get, is that they're all pre-tested, which doesn't happen with GCSEs and A levels, for example. So that a national curriculum assessment, by the time it hits a school, it's already at 2 prior pre-tests, and that is, I think that's really, really good practice, because in effect, you start off with a list of questions, and then you get some volunteer children to sit down and have a go at these questions, and then you look how they've performed in it. I mean, it's quite well structured. For example, you've got to do it with kids of exactly the same age as the ones who will take the full test. So that means that you're in effect going out to some schools on the day that kids have done English, the national curriculum assessment, and then saying, when you've had a run round for 10 minutes, can you come back in and do this kind of trial test that we've set up. And you can understand that. In fact, we have got, we call a pre-test effect on that. The kids know that, the teachers know that, they know it's not really about them. So, and they kind of relax a little bit, but yeah, they all seem to relax about the same amount every year. So it just gives you some indication, and you can then look at how kids perform on the the live test to the pre-test. But on the back of that, modifications are made, it's restructured, etc. So when it does it, the schools, it has been trialled, as it were. And I think that's the only thing that's happened that way. But even then, I don't think teachers fully appreciate that. And it doesn't mean to say that assessment is foolproof. There will still be things in there teachers don't like. There will still be things in there that may confuse certain children and what have you. But I think it is a good process. So yeah, we've kind of, that's well embedded within the system. But I don't think we'll ever. I mean, assessment by its nature, you'll never get the perfect assessment. It's just, it's just not out there.
Yeah.
And there's always been this thing about, this difference between the achieve score and the true score. Because the true score will be that thing that, when everything collides and works together, it really does reflect what that individual knows about the entire subject. Because if, in most papers, it depends what you were taught last, maybe sticks in your mind, or the bits that you've revised, or in some cases, we know of kids who've appealed about exams because the teachers haven't taught certain elements of the syllabus. So, there's always this broad assumption that we talk about them being standardized, which they are in terms of a strict definition, but we don't know about the teaching. The teaching's not standardized. No, we know they all sit down at the same time on the same day to get the same paper, but these kids are coming from very different backgrounds in terms of what they've covered. There might be good reasons why they haven't covered all of the stuff in the syllabus, but then you sit down on that day, and if the paper focuses on those things that you haven't covered, is that really is that a fair insight into that child's ability or capability? So yeah, I think there's a lot of things we need to think about, and it's probably around this whole idea of a one-off test, a 1 hour test or a 3 hour test, whatever.
Yeah.
Which we tend to favour because it's more reliable, but it's not as valid as some tests that are done over time. Dylan Williams and others talk about, and Win Harlan and others have spoken about, the more you test, the more you cover, you build up a picture. So you really could test, if you like, or assess the entire curriculum, whereas a 1 hour paper, 3 hour paper can only sample.
Yeah.
And and if that kid's great on that sample, that might be their best bit. They might be really good on that sample and do well.
Yeah.
And it's it's not really a true reflection of their broad understanding of geography or maths or whatever.
Is there any tidbit of information that you think teachers should know about assessment in just 1 minute CPD?
I guess my advice would be to get people to take it more seriously, to engage with it, and not see it as that add-on, that extra bit that's external. Think of it as a basic tool of teaching and learning. It's part of the process, and spend some time looking into it. And I think, besides, I would advocate things like the Chartered Assessors, CIA's courses and lead assessors, because that would give them those nuts and bolts and some basic understanding. CIA is one, the lead assessor. All the products are available. If someone can find something else great, do go for it. Evidence-based education, another group who do some fantastic things around this as well. But look into assessment, because it is a basic tool of teaching and learning. Don't see it as that extra bit that's stuck on. It's that bit that the exam boards do, or it's, in fact, the stuff about formative assessment that frightens the life out of me is the kind of act of theatre that I see around this. And I've spoken to Dylan Williams about this. But I won't use the language we use, but we're a little bit dismayed, I think, about the quality in schools. And I think it was when I was doing some of my research at Leeds, this came up. One of the heads of science I was speaking to said that she thought it was woeful, the formative assessment that went on in her school, because she said it's not really assessment, it's theatre. And I said, just explain that to me. And she said, well, what it is, people learn the rules. So they hold up, is it red sticks or yellow sticks or green sticks, or wave a card about, because they know that if they wave that card about, the teacher will leave them alone. Yes, got it, miss, thank you. So they've learnt the theatre, but I don't think they've really understood the fundamentals about how to ask good questions, how to probe, how to develop that. And on the back of that, then what do you do with it? And they are doing a lot of this intuitively. Teachers constantly, as I just said earlier, that they're looking at the faces of the kids. Are they engaged? Are they listening? And they know the kids. They know who might have issues with certain things. But having that deeper understanding about what we mean by validity and reliability. And anytime they're using assessment, there's just a few things I think they should always ask is, what is it they're trying to assess? And, really what is it? I don't mean they're trying to understand, the use of the full stop or the semicolon. I think, deeper than that, what you're trying to get at. And then ask yourself, why? Why are you assessing that and not all these other things that you could assess? There's then something about how you're going to do it, because there are lots of different ways that you can do in terms of how to assess people, from written papers, holding bits of card up, or God knows what it is, but work out the specifics of what you're trying to understand. What is the best way to get to the bottom of that? Is it a practical? Is it through written? Is it through observation? Whatever it might be. There's anything about when is the best time to do this? And again, it depends on what you're trying to find out. For formative things, and people often do things at the start of a course to work out where people are, because we know that prior learning is kind of the key indicator of what happens next, really. So an understanding of that, but doing that well takes some guile. And then the last bit is, when you've got those outcomes, what are you going to do with it? You now found that out. What next? And there's well, I won't mention his name, but there's a fantastic bloke who works in maths and mastering maths. And one of his takeaways about the formative stuff, about, he thinks a lot of maths teachers don't ask really good questions, or they're happy when the kids say, "Yeah, I got it, sir," because it means that he doesn't have to find another way of explaining something. And that is a real demand, because sometimes what comes back from that little assessment with the kids is more of a question for you, is, so how are you going to get around that? Because if you've already taught it once and they haven't got it, you've got to find another way of doing it. And I think that comes back then to this, the usefulness of subject knowledge and pedagogical knowledge that sit alongside the assessment knowledge. You have to triangulate those things, because if you've tried your best first time to explain algorithms or something in trigonometry, the kids haven't got it, or a significant number haven't got it, you have to look at yourself then and think, right, maybe that was me. Did I explain it in the right way, or is there a different way of doing it? Because it didn't work last time. So yeah, I think being reflective and seeing assessment as integral to teaching and learning, not as an add-on, not as something that's been done to people. It's not a nasty word. It's not the work of the devil. It can be used badly, because we know that people use and abuse it, as I mentioned earlier. But it really is the nuts and bolts of teaching and learning. And it's not just about getting kids through GCSEs and A-levels and the ABS. It's about improving your teaching in your classroom with your pupils. That's the power of assessment. So embrace it.
Wow, it's inspirational stuff, Mick. Really valuable insights into the whole thing, and your wealth of experience just grounds it all. It's really, really good stuff. If you enjoyed listening to Dr. Mick Walker, then don't worry, because our interview went really long and there is loads more material that we'll be sharing with you over the coming weeks. In the meantime, if you find the podcast useful, then like, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your colleagues, and we'll be back again soon. Bye for now.